Hey Mike, how's it going? Welcome to our third Skills Masterclass.
It's going great. Welcome to New York.
I've got myself a new podcast studio, so I'm trying to up my game here on making this a good experience for everybody. So hopefully this podcast studio will bring some magic to these masterclasses.
Amazing.
Welcome everyone. Welcome. Good to see you all joining. All right. So welcome to Skills Masterclass. This is where we unbundle one industry at a time. Today, we're focused on the manufacturing industry. I'm Siobhan Savage, and I'm one of the founders and also the CEO of Reejig. I'm today joined by Mike Reed, who's our Chief Product Officer, and also our in-house work ontology expert, and also another founder. Before we get focused into the detail and the incredible insights that we've pulled together for you today, first, we're going to spend some time just going over what you're about to experience. What is the agenda for today? So first, we're going to really focus on the industry outlook. So what's actually happening? What's the growth looking like? What are the CEOs saying? Then we're going to focus on the work ontology. So what is the data telling us about the impacts to work when it comes to either AI and just the growth and transformation? And then we're going to focus on the reskilling strategies that folks need to take with this in mind. And finally, we'll hopefully give you some really good insights that you can bring back to your workforce today to really focus on how you can take action. Now, the industry as a whole, manufacturing touches every single one of us in every single country. The growth has been modest. It hasn't been incredible, growth across the industry, but still, we're still seeing this industry valued at over 44 trillion and 16% of global GDP. The modest growth is experienced, through this transformation that we're seeing. So there's increases in productivity and efficiency resulting from AI and automation as folks think about transformation. So there's a lot of focus on, really how do we ensure that we've got the right manufacturing industry within our own countries globally and looking at supply chain. And then also the focus on how we're going to accelerate over the next 5 years using AI, using automation, and building sustainable supply chain as well. So this is a real focus for the industry as a whole. Digital transformation and green tech is really reshaping that productivity, especially when it comes to environmental impacts within manufacturing itself. Now, one of the things that we love to do at Reejig is we love to look at actually what the CEOs care about. What are we hearing when we look at the earnings reports? What are the key themes that we see CEOs really focused on and talking about? As you can see here, we've looked at Dow, we've looked at General Motors, we've looked at pretty much every major company within the manufacturing sector. And as you can see from the word cloud, supply chain has been a real focus. We've seen through COVID as well, Mike, there was a lot of supply chain risk where a lot of organizations have really deeply focused on supply chain as number one priority because we've seen such a drastic impact to supply chain. So it's not surprising to me that supply chain is showing up here. Is it for you?
No, and supply chain links into that bottom one as well. So I think as there's more risk around securing supply chain, more geographies are taking responsibility for more of that themselves. So they're seeing what was previously a push to globalize, pulling back some of those key elements of the manufacturing process onshore. So reshoring has been a real thing that's starting to reshape manufacturing, particularly over the last couple of years. And one of the reasons it's seen reasonably flat growth, 3 to 4%, but having got through that establishment phase, moving into digital transformation, moving into the adoption of AI, still dealing with what they need to deal with environmental. I think that we see increased growth up to 5% per annum over the next 5 years.
Yeah, and I think the key kind of themes overall we've seen was supply chain, sustainability, production, and then a lot of talk about reshoring. So the industry went through a massive period of offshoring. They were looking at creating sustainable, scalable, cost, sensitive initiatives to enable them to obviously make more profit. And what we're seeing now is the return of bringing the manufacturing back onshore again, which, I think is probably off the back of COVID and seeing like the country resilience and the resilience that we would have seen, whether it's at a country level, a government level, or whether it's just in the companies themselves, having that supply chain risk was, a massive key impact that we would have seen. And probably we've never seen it at that level before. So this is really what the CEOs are caring about. Folks, if you're not spending time looking at earnings calls, I highly suggest that you look at your own company's earnings calls, or you look at your peers within the market, and this will really help you understand what the CEOs are caring about, because that will directly link into your own workforce strategies. It's really simple to do. Just go and Google it, find the transcription, and then put it into ChatGPT and summarize it. And that will give you the insights of really what's being said and what's important, because this should be directly linking to any of your workforce strategies going forward. So we've learned about sort of what the CEOs are caring about. And as you can see, this, especially if we're looking at, reshoring, and we're looking at AI and transformation, this is going to require a new workforce strategy. We're going to start to really think about how we adopt AI, how we look at sort of offshoring, onshoring, how we think about, especially as we're moving sort of manufacturing from traditional manufacturing into more AI-driven robotics. There is an incredible amount of digital factories that I'm seeing now starting to be talked about, whether it's in FMCG, whether it's across standard manufacturing. There is a lot of conversation about now, how do we build digital factories and how do we use robotics to do this? Now, for us, it's really important that, when we're looking at our workforce strategy, that we're being really bold. So we want our organizations and the folks that we partner with to be really bold and look at ways that they can solve their critical workforce strategies. But at the same time, we need our customers to be really responsible. We need them to be thinking about, if they are going to make these transformations within their workforce, how do we make sure that folks are not left behind? And this is really important to our mission of zero waste to potential. So when you're thinking about your workforce strategies, we want you to think about it with being really bold and help your CEO achieve the goals that they need to at a shareholder and at a board level. And then secondly, we want to make sure that we're being really responsible and making sure that no one is left behind. So this is really important, Mike, in terms of the way we're thinking about all of our workforce transformations in these masterclasses. Really how you bring sort of bold and responsible to life at a workforce strategy. So one, we want you to reinvent your workforce. You need to understand the work at a deeper level. So what is actually happening within the workforce today? What is the work that's being done at a task, and also the skills required to complete those tasks? Because when you have that understanding of the work itself, you're able to look at those tasks and understand where is the sort of AI potential, where is a way of us reinventing and thinking about our workforce in a different way. We're then looking at that sort of moving work to worker, whether it's our current employees, whether it's our offshoring or onshoring workforce, or whether it's our digital workforce. How do we increase productivity and velocity by giving folks access to meaningful work? And that's really focused on using the opportunity marketplace to really think about opportunity and that orchestration of work to worker. And this is where we all got to get better as organizations, is that orchestration and that sort of velocity and productivity speed up. And then finally, building this sort of responsible side of the workforce is, how do you retain your top folks, create that culture of opportunity while making sure that you're reskilling folks and leaving no one behind. As we start to adopt more AI, as we start to think about more digital workers, whether that's robotics or AI or generative AI, there will be impacts to your people, and it is your responsibility to make sure that you leave no one behind. So this is the really core focus that we have today in this session, is to break down, where is that impact and what action you can take to do that. One of the key things about the work ontology, so for us, it's really about understanding the work at a deeper level. You will not be able to do anything strategic when it comes to workforce transformation, opportunity marketplace, AI adoption, any of these things without first understanding your work. And one of the things that we've sort of really focused on with everyone at the moment is, like, jobs have tasks, AI automates tasks, tasks need skills, and people have skills. So jobs do not have skills, jobs have tasks. AI automates the tasks, and you need skills to complete the tasks, and people have skills. So when you're thinking about your own workforce transformation, this is a bit of a kind of playbook for you to help you think about this at a much deeper level, but also in a really simple way so that folks can really understand it. Because a lot of the work that we will talk about in the transformation requires you to deeply understand your work first. Now, from a Reejig work ontology, we're focused on the manufacturing industry today, Mike. We spent quite a lot of time with our data folks, really focused on how do we create some really good insights. And one of the things that we have been focused on is making sure that when we're breaking down each industry, every industry is so specific in itself. Healthcare is very different from manufacturing, is very different from technology to professional services. And it's very interesting, the insights that we see as we break down every single industry first. And today we're really focused on that work ontology for the manufacturing industry. Now, what you can see is just a screenshot example of what the work ontology would look like if it was in the product. This is just demo data, so this is not actually real. And this is really taking each one of the jobs that exist within your workforce, and we break that down into tasks. We break it down into sort of skills required to complete those tasks. And we have a whole pile of insights that we can tell you about each industry and about each job, which will help you inform sort of your decisions. But it's also some of the stuff that Mike is going to walk you through today as well. Now, when we've broken down your work ontology, so we spent a whole pile of time looking at the industry of manufacturing. We broke down every single job within that industry. We then looked at every single task that we would expect folks to be doing within those jobs. And when you have that data, it is incredible the amount of insights that we can tell you. We have over 23 different work ontologies, sorry. Each industry has its own specific one. And if we have every job, every task, and we can tell you the skills required to complete those tasks, what we're then able to start doing is looking at what is the AI potential index for each job and also your workforce. Where is the workforce bloat? So if you want to increase velocity and increase productivity, you first need to identify where your bloated areas are within your business. So where is there task duplication? How do we increase that velocity? How do we reduce those task duplications and free workers up so they can focus on high value work? What is the AI ROI? So what's the timeline? So if you are thinking about adopting AI, what is the timeline then when you think about when that will be highly valuable and you'll start seeing the return of investment? And then finally, what is the reskilling pivots? So if we are looking at areas where we're impacting AI, jobs are being impacted with AI, what is the reskilling and pivot moment that we should start making sure that folks are aware of, and we sort of nudge people in our businesses to take that new direction? So Mike, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand you over so that you can start walking us through the manufacturing industry itself, the details that you've seen within the ontology. So would really love to understand, what are you seeing? What is the most important things that you have found when you've looked at the data today?
For sure. Thanks for that. Manufacturing is a brilliant example of the potential of robotics automation, the significant commercial change that's possible in this environment, this shift to Industry 4.0. Looking at healthcare in our previous session, that's really being driven by, or one of the reasons it's being driven is the looming workforce shortage, whereas in manufacturing, there's a real push to commercial objectives, but also a real sensitivity to ensuring that they're managing environmental impact. So this is really driving, for different reasons, but towards the same outcome. You touched on digital factories before, and I think that's a large element that sits in the future of, or the now and in the future of, a lot of different industries within the manufacturing sector. But what we see there is that's, to a large extent, also completely reshaping the workforce. So the workforce strategy that you need for digital factories, which are highly automated robotic production lines, as opposed to the mechanized production lines we have now and historically, significant workforce shift. So the thinking around that is a whole of business decision. It's not just how do I get more value out of this person sitting in this seat or out of this role. We can still look at that, but that kind of shift in the nature of the workforce to a digital factory is significant. Manufacturing industry, the composition is shifting as well, particularly in those production roles, which makes up most of the roles. So 60% is an aggregate across a whole lot of different subsectors in the manufacturing industry. But we see in that production sector of the workforce, they're transitioning to need those kind of multi-skills in the immediate term, which are working across both the traditional work lines and automated production lines. And then we have other sectors which to some extent replicate other industries. We've got the engineering and the technical space with experience in production lines, mechanized, robotic, and automated. We've got the supply chain, which again kind of is the other side of the coin from the transport and the logistics industry. And then we've got those other roles, and the other roles keep coming up. The accounting roles, finance, marketing, operations, procurement, those ones which are common to most enterprises, but are also rapidly changing as a result of AI and automation.
So given you're seeing 60% of that workforce composition is made up of production roles, and the amount of what we are seeing on the ground with customers talking about digital factories, are you seeing this as one of the most highly impacted industries? Like, or am I
Yes.
just putting words in your mouth? Because like when I'm looking at this data, by the way, that's what I'm looking at, and I'm going, wowzer, like that's huge, right? Like,
Yeah, and the impact on the production, on most of the production industry will be a whole of business decision. We're talking about completely reshaping the nature of the factories that are delivering the outcome. So this is a whole of business decision. That sits outside the remit of workforce. Absolutely, workforce plays a part in it. What I've tried to look at when I've looked in how our team, how our customers, how the market can be bold, is what are those roles that exist today which don't change significantly, but from a bold perspective, we see huge opportunities in efficiencies and effectiveness and productivity by leveraging the kind of AI and automation that sits around them at the moment.
wow, eye-opening stuff. It's actually, the more that I even look at this data, the more that, you know, it's incredible to think like that there's that level of high impacted areas within one sector, and also you've got all the complications of like, you know, velocity, speeding up productivity. You're looking at production outputs, you're looking at, you know, offshoring, reshoring. Like there is so much change in this industry. I think this is one of the more complex ones that we've looked at in the last few of these masterclasses, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking at converting from a historic mechanical production line to an automated robotic one, it doesn't need to be in the same postcode. It could be in any jurisdiction. It could be anywhere. So there's a whole lot of other business criteria that are considered in those kind of decisions. So rather than look at what happens if a robot's replacing my role on the assembly line, I've looked at those roles which will exist in the current environment as well as in the future environment, and seen which of those roles have the most near-term, most immediate upside for operational efficiency and productivity. And the three within the production space that I focused on here were those roles around quality control inspectors was the example there, inventory managers in that kind of supply and logistics side, and then the machine maintenance technicians. So those roles will remain. They'll remain largely unchanged. There's going to be some upskilling required, but largely unchanged. But there is significant opportunity for improvement in quality of outcome, efficiency, productivity, with elements of AI, of automation, of robotics that are mature in market at the moment. So if I have a look at the top one, quality inspectors, the transition from manual to AI machine vision systems to detect defects in the production line at speed, at a higher quality level, that are delivering a better outcome than the manual processes, delivers a significant operational improvement. And because these systems are reasonably standalone, they can be adjacent to the existing infrastructure. They can be reasonably quick to implement. If I look at inventory managers, this is again similar to some of those systems we may have seen in finance and accounts, similar to some of those systems we may have seen in procurement or in marketing, where we're delivering a system, an AI-based system, which is supporting improved demand forecasting, improved automated restocking, improved inventory optimization. The complexity here comes with any large integration plan. Now we're talking about integrating these new platforms into an existing ERP kind of landscape. And while that's not as significant as a wholesale replacement of a mechanized production system with a robotic one, we know how these large scale enterprise level integrations go, that they take 12 months, they take time, but there is significant upside in the ability to move your inventory management system to just in time out, the just in time outside. And then when we look at the third one that I kind of pulled out, machine maintenance technicians, the ability to implement IoT, Internet of Things sensors around your installation, so that you have additional sets of eyes and ears that allow us to understand how is the system working, how is production working, what are we seeing which would lead the machines to indicate there's a predictive analytic trend towards failure, allowing us to come in and predictively maintain, so we're not incurring downtime, with a production line offline, we're not incurring the labor costs of people standing around waiting for that to come online. There's the effectiveness and the efficiencies that result of a stronger move towards predictive maintenance, significant for the overall productivity of a factory. These examples are just grabbed from that production section. The opportunities around marketing and procurement, those standard enterprise roles around administration, customer support, they still exist here. They're still possible. But in the manufacturing industry, I think because of the large focus in the workforce on that production line, on the production side, I thought there was a real need to look at what roles exist today where we can already be starting to make a move without having to consider the whole of business decision of transitioning from a mechanized assembly line to a robotic and automated assembly line.
The maintenance one is also like not just the impact to workforce, but it would also increase quality, velocity, output, because if we're able to predict based on something breaking before it breaks, that you never have that downtime, which means velocity of creation. It's kind of like a double whammy in terms of like not only looking at like enabling, you know, a faster workforce and looking at automation in a different way, but it also has a direct line to the bottom line. And I think if you were to look at the ability to look at both sides of that coin, you would see that that one's kind of a no-brainer. And it's like the thing with AI, it's like, where is sort of the most value in terms of cash to the business to think about AI, but also what's causing the most pain. And I don't think anyone wants their customers to have like stock shortages. They don't want to have time delays in their delivery. Like, I think this is where it becomes a really interesting view of like this rule. That specific one is an example of like, is such high impact in terms of, you know, for the workforce, but also for customer velocity and, you know, revenue. So, you know, it's very, very, very interesting from that. And to your point, like we're seeing a consistent theme across any corporate functions. Every major organization, every industry has your typical desktop jobs essentially that have, you know, your marketing, your sales, your procurement, your finance, etc. So you're always going to see the same results. We should do a masterclass, Mike, that's just focused on corporate. You know, to make like, it's kind of like, because in these sessions we don't want to overwhelm with so much data, so I do think that we should add a masterclass which is just focused on desktops, like actually what's happening within the corporate, which will be really interesting.
I did feel like I was repeating myself over the last few. It was kind of narrowing in on there, and that's just because there is so much value in the standard enterprise functions. But which is why in this one I focused on the production side, and we see here, I think you described it really well. How do we go faster, and how do we go more effectively? The biggest impact for speed was around inventory management. And while predictive maintenance is a huge upside, it also requires a lot more infrastructure with a sensor array, the calibration of those. So there's a bit more time required to implement and deliver on the physical side as well. But inventory management, while it's an integration of systems, can move an organization closer and closer to that just-in-time delivery dream, where it's the raw materials are being converted into the process materials to be delivered and shipped in the smallest amount of time possible. So it's gone from raw materials to product in the most accelerated fashion. And that's what an AI-driven inventory management gives us an element of. It allows us to reduce delays in the material provision so that we know when's the last minute we can get it, how can we get it to the destination, and that supply chain optimization that allows us to deliver that whole process faster.
And a 25% enabling increase of inventory and going speed, that's incredible. Like the opportunity here for things to be done in a different way. Yeah,
so this is not even selling anymore. This is just being able to deliver it quicker. So there's less storage costs. You can be much more flexible. And similarly, when we're looking at the amount saved, we can look at the example that you pulled out of the previous roles, predictive maintenance improvements. The reduced downtime on production lines means you don't have labor standing around. You've got to pay for your workforce, whether the production line's running or not. So you're making most effective use of your standing labor costs. And at the same time, you're minimizing your maintenance and your repair costs to respond to an issue after it's happened. Whereas with predictive maintenance, you're getting the insights that allow you to schedule downtime so that they don't impact your production runs, and make sure that you're maximizing the value out of your capital investment and your production infrastructure.
Wow. I remember when I was starting to learn about AI, like right at the beginning of my career, like that transition from HR into AI. And I remember one of the podcasts and things that I was listening to was actually in the manufacturing, and it was all about the predictive maintenance. And I was like so fascinated by the potential of like that. So this is kind of bringing me back to the early days of like learning about AI, and it's just the ability for work to be done in a different way, and for us to think about, you know, that right on time inventory management as well as that predictive maintenance just shows you that, you know, with some thought and some strategy that you could actually redesign your workforce in a completely different way. It's incredible, actually.
Yeah,
So
so
tell us about the areas then, Mike, for AI implementation.
So I've touched on a few of these already. So predictive maintenance using a real-time sensor array, predicting machine failures before they occur, reducing maintenance costs, reducing downtime. So this is a real and current opportunity that most organizations are already pursuing. Quality control and inspection, as I said, a transition to machine vision systems to detect product defects during production, significant improvement in the impact that has on the whole production speed, because the production speed is to some extent governed by the quality process. And then the last one on the top there was the supply chain optimization, which is inventory management and logistics using AI to optimize the transfer of goods, raw materials and goods around the process, significant impact directly to speed. Then we see some that I haven't kind of touched on, robotics and automation. We've mentioned that is to fully conceive of a digital factory is a whole of business decision, because now we need to consider the locations and all of those aspects which have a direct link to the future of the workforce. But the ability to significantly jump the high speed, high precision, repetitive tasks at speed, at quality, increasing throughput. 20% was the lowest number that I could find across any of the subsectors in the manufacturing industry for the improvements there. But this is coming at a huge capital cost to reconfigure what's essentially the whole of the business, the whole of the manufacturing business around the production line. And then the last one that I had a look at there, the top 5, mainly focused on the production side, is around demand forecasting and production planning. Again, using models to assess historic sales, current market trends, predict future demand, reducing excess inventory so you're not holding more stock than you need to, again, leading to a higher level of production efficiency of the order of 15%. So again, using AI similar to the way it's being used in predictive maintenance, but in demand forecasting to look at how much stock do I need based on all that I've seen in the past and how I can apply that to the future.
It is one of the things about the manufacturing side that kind of scares me a little bit, is a lot of the manufacturing sort of sites and plants are typically in kind of rural kind of communities. And, you know, this is why when we think about the move towards digital factories, has to be one that's thought through as a whole business, like you're saying, because, you know, to overnight switch into that digital factory mode, you are going to impact not only the workforce, but also the community as a whole. Because typically these types of factories are sort of in rural communities. They're probably one of the few jobs in town, and they really are kind of that heart of the economy when it comes to, you know, the workforce and the deskless workers. So, you know, this is the one that kind of gives me pause. You know, the size of the opportunity for automation is incredible, but then there is the measured approach of like, okay, well, what is the impacts of this? And, you know, Mike, the data is really interesting because it's telling me like pretty much if you're thinking about corporate and also here, you've got majority of actually the roles that are going to be sort of focused within the manufacturing space itself has impacts to AI.
Yeah, and I think you did call it out when you went through what's on the CEO's mind. They all talked around AI and automation, but they also talked about environmental impact. And part of that is the impact on society. So it's not just the workforce in the factory that is going to be impacted, but it's all those services around it. So who's freighting in lunches, who's doing schools, what's the infrastructure around the societal infrastructure around a factory which dominates maybe a small town. So bold and responsible, as you said at the outset, has to go in hand. This is when we talk to the nature of the whole factory, the nature of the whole production line, then this is a whole of business decision. And how are you going to take those bold steps to stay in step with the future, but do it responsibly?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I'm already starting to, work alongside customers and speak to folks that have already went on the digital factory road, like they're on the journey basically. And whether that's in the US or in Australia or in the UK, we are seeing examples of this. I mean, Amazon would be a pretty high example, very public example of, really optimized delivery, optimized production, optimized, supply chain. And I think the one thing I just caution folks on, to your point about bold and responsible, is yes, there's an incredible opportunity here, but like, where is the highest value places to start first? And then what is that impact then going to look like into society? And I think there will be a lot of pressure on the CEOs. Like, you cannot harvest people out of jobs without thinking about what happens next. So I think like that's where I think most CEOs will be sitting right now, is looking at, well, if I want to achieve all of this, how do I do it? And this bold and responsible leader will become the leader of our time, because they'll be able to enhance and adopt AI while not sort of, harvesting people out of jobs, which is really what the potential here is, right?
Yeah, I think you mentioned before that the ESG reporting and environmental green tech, it was a key theme through all of the reports we've been reading.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised, as you've said before, that doesn't start to also bring in the societal costs.
Yeah.
It's not just about sustainability, it's not just about environment, but there's also a societal cost here that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, and reskilling is a critical part of this journey. As AI takes over routine tasks, as manufacturing workers need to pivot into higher value roles, like overseeing AI-driven systems or taking on specialized, roles within that digital factory, because like the digital factories will still need human in the loop. It becomes like, well, what do those roles actually look like? So it's more a reinvention of the industry as a whole when you think about digital factories. We're really focused on making sure that organizations need to become a skill building powerhouse. We really need to focus on making sure that we're really bold and really responsible, and really talk us through, Mike, from a actual reskilling pathways. Like, what does that look like when we think about this new journey towards sort of digital adoption, digital factories?
Yep. So I looked at a few key roles where I could describe in the data what that skill path, what that reskilling career path could look like. So assembly line to a robotics operator. So on the assembly line, that workforce understand the process. And they also know how to maintain the production pace. So they know that the production line doesn't stop. The production line moves at pace. So they understand both the process and also how to maintain throughput. The skills that are needed to kind of transition into supporting the robotics to deliver that same function are around the operations process and the troubleshooting of the robotics infrastructure. So there is a career path we can see there that leverages the skills that they already have and the knowledge that they already have that's key to the particular manufacture that they're involved in, but also moves them towards supporting the robotics infrastructure. That's not a short-term timeline. So the kind of reskilling from the assembly line into that is we see is probably about a 12-month transition. That one's orange because it kind of sits inside of what a project might be to transition an actual factory to a robotic and automation line. Looking at the quality control, we again touched on this on the way through, moving it to more of an AI quality specialist. They understand the product quality standards, whether it's regulated or whether it's in-house. They understand the production process. What they need then is to start to come to an understanding of how the machine vision systems will work and support that role. It won't be the same, but what is the capability there? And then how can they look at calibrating the performance of that system so that it's able to learn from the quality of the thing on the way through. So that one's around a 6-month upskilling path from what we've seen in the data there. And that one's green because that sits kind of in line with or alongside the time frame that it might take to implement a standalone and adjacent automated quality system. We looked at a career path from a forklift operator to an autonomous fleet supervisor. So recognizing that we may no longer require people to drive forklifts around the workshop floor, but have an automated fleet of robotics doing that. Awareness of warehouse layouts and transition warehouse layouts, understanding materials handling and the nature of equipment that's handling materials, what it's capable of, what the parameters are. This exists in this workforce at the moment. what we're looking then is though to transition them to understand how to do this for a fleet rather than at the controls of an individual vehicle. So we see a similar scenario in the mining and resources industry with a move towards automated machinery moving materials around mine sites. And again, this one we see probably the 12 months to transition people into this skill set might actually be faster than the timeline to transition to this kind of a project. So that one's kind of coming to the kind of amber rating. Down on the bottom, I've got machinery operator to a predictive maintenance technician. Again, the machine operators at the moment have an understanding of how the production machinery operates at the moment, typically have some capability in basic maintenance. We need to be transitioning that to be able to interpret the data around predictive maintenance as well. So what are we seeing around the machines in operation that's indicating that there may be an issue that we want to proactively address? And then similar to the quality control, how do we calibrate those machines so that we're understanding what the patterns look like? What are the kind of parameters that we're using to accept acceptable performance and performance that indicates they may require some maintenance? And again, the reason that's 18 months is it's a reasonably significant shift from a machine operator into a technician role, particularly into a predictive maintenance technician role, but it does leverage some of those existing skills that are held in that workforce. And the last one that I grabbed from an example from the manufacturing industry was that procurement officer or a procurement clerk moving into a supply chain analyst. So they understand supplier management, they understand the purchase order process, they understand the procurement obligations around both sides, but moving into an analytics of that process, moving into adopting AI platforms to support the throughput of this in a faster manner is the skills that they're going to adopt. And also that's not so huge a leap here along this career path. And again, at 6 months, this could line up reasonably well with the delivery of a project to deliver this efficiency as well.
And like that directly links into the supply chain real-time delivery, right? Like you need that skill set for like procurement and supply chain analysts to make sure that we're, you know, able to deliver on that dream state, right? Because that's a skill set that doesn't exist right now.
Yeah, it's the whole journey from procurement of raw materials through delivery and logistics of raw materials to storage of raw materials to moving it around on site and to moving that backlog into your own inventory of produced materials and how do I get it to who want it. And this is the just-in-time process. How short can I make that process? How many bottlenecks can I remove from that? So I'm minimizing the amount of time from having to pay for the raw materials to getting cash in the door from selling the produced goods at the end of the process.
Yeah. And do you know the really interesting thing as well? Like when a lot of the AI conversation is pretty doom and gloom when it comes to like taking people's jobs and the impacts. But actually, this is a perfect example of like an opportunity moment, like a culture of opportunity creation, where, you know, if an organization is building this culture of being a skill building powerhouse, that there also is all these new jobs that are being created, you know, with the opportunity. And I think that's incredibly exciting for folks to be able to evolve and navigate themselves, and for these opportunities to be, you know, really critical roles. Some of the jobs here that you're talking about are not jobs that are current today, but actually will become really critical roles within the organization, especially these roles like supply chain analysts and others that actually will become incredibly important, like AI quality specialists, that we'll be really needing when it comes to this new digital factory world, where we are starting to see a lot more sort of AI and robotics within in the sector itself. This is really helpful, Mike. It's really, really interesting, actually. Very interesting. So a couple of the key sort of takeaways for us to really focus on here is, you know, one, we want you all to reinvent your workforce. This is just a bit of a touch into what's possible based on the data that we can see. You know, where are the impacts? Where is the best place? Where is the highest level of impact when it comes to AI potential, and where to think about redesigning and reinventing your workforce? You know, two, then what we want to be able to do is really think about that mobilizing your work to workers. How do we make sure that we can increase velocity, ensure that everyone has access to meaningful work? And that could be through this adoption of like, whether it's digital factories and folks being mobilized now into new opportunities or stepping up and doing other things, it's a very important moment that needs to be thought through as well around how do we mobilize and orchestrate work to worker. And then finally, really thinking about reskilling. How do we look at creating that view of what's the opportunity for our people? How do we retain them? How do we help folks as well self-navigate? You know, there's a lot of conversation right now from folks asking, like, what's the AI impact to my job? And people don't know. So what we want to be able to do is actually give that data away so that folks have that ability to understand what is the impact, but also how do I navigate myself, you know, so that not only is my company thinking about this, but me as an individual, I'm also thinking about it as well. And I think, you know, the impact is when you have this type of data, you can really look at the roadmap to where you want to think about adoption of AI. So we're seeing a lot of people scrambling to think about AI adoption, and they're going to roll out strategies that haven't really been thought out when it comes to bold and responsible. What we want to be able to do is tell you, here is the highest impact areas to think about, you know, your AI implementation strategy. And then what we're wanting to look at is the productivity and velocity increase, and then creating that culture of opportunity and reskilling sort of people so that no one is left behind. So these kind of are the things that folks need to really think about when it comes to sort of really looking at that. And apologies, there's a couple of typos on this deck, but that's just me rushing through trying to get this written up today. So apologies if you're seeing my typos. I know people love to tell me when I've made spelling mistakes, so I'm calling it out before someone tells me on the chat because it's guaranteed. I should not be rushing.
I'm going to
It
start
proves though I
using.
haven't been using AI to write these decks, right?
I'm going to start using predicity and velocity as verbs for something. Just one thing on the reskilling, more than any of the other reviews that we've done for this masterclass so far, the manufacturing industry, it was clear that the workforce holds IP. They have an understanding. They are an investment. They have an understanding of the process. There is opportunity to leverage that and find a way to use that in the future. So I think there's a whole lot of stuff that sits between that, like how many do we need, what do we need, where do we need them? But that workforce, whether it's on the production line, whether it's in the maintenance, whether it's quality team, they already hold a whole lot of investment around how this works successfully, and finding a way to maintain that and use it in this new workforce is going to be critical.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And like, we've got some questions that have been coming in throughout the conversation. I think this probably could be a really good opportunity for us to kind of address some of those before we wrap up, Mike. You know, one of the questions was, how can leaders address labor shortages impacting the ability to meet industry demands globally?
Yeah, well, that's a good one, and it's a really interesting question when it's alongside the recent trend towards reshoring. So bringing as much of the supply chain as possible back into a controlled geography or a controlled jurisdiction. Yeah, I think we can look at those, the initial set of roles that I kind of focused on as an example, the quality, inventory management, predictive tech. Like we can be identifying opportunities for more efficiency there, to do more with less today already in those areas. There are some big opportunities in manufacturing about, as you said, the digital factories that addresses to some degree a labour shortage, but it requires other types of labour. So I think there's a right now thing. There's right now looking at those roles where we can be transitioning them to be more effective and address, similar to we talked about in the healthcare. How do I make a nurse more effective, or how do I make your quality team more effective if I can't find enough people for that team?
Yeah, you can see as well, like from a leader's perspective, like, wow, they're getting like a triple whammy right now. They've got pressure to cut costs. There's critical shortages of talent. They've got AI, you know, coming in as well. Like there is this just massive sort of like push right now at the CEO and leader level within this industry that is even just transitioning from certain types of energy production within their factories as well into green. Like there's just so many things that are happening right now, and then just the cost of goods is going to become so commoditized and cheap when it comes to, you know, when you think about AI and what's possible, you know, the promise of everything being a lot cheaper. Then it's like, how do folks make money? Like it's like it really does become this pressure cooker where CEOs really are going to have to really think about reinvention of their workforce. Another question as well that came through halfway through, it was like, how can incorporating AI into our workforce strategy support reshoring efforts and help reduce labor costs. And what's really interesting about that question is typically offshoring is seen as the cost efficient way. So reshoring becomes actually quite expensive when when you look at that. Like, what do you reckon about that one, Mike?
Yeah, and that's the opportunity to do it different. So rather than a completely manual workforce, to take the opportunity to bring it back on shore and look at doing it in a different way. So you get to look at that whole component that you're reintroducing to the economy and say, well, how can I deliver this with a different type of labor workforce? Because it's not like for like anymore. So if I'm bringing back some element of the supply chain, how can I automate that, or how can I leverage AI? And I think we touched on a couple of those examples already.
Yeah, that's the one thing. Like, a lot of what I'm hearing right now at a workforce level is, as folks are starting to sort of adopt and look at this new world of like cost pressures, offshoring has become back in trend again. Like, I'm hearing a lot of it, but yet in this industry, we're seeing a lot of reshoring. So it's like, to your point, you have to boldly reinvent the workforce and thinking about, how do I make individuals more productive and the velocity so that you're getting a lot more output, so that you're keeping human in the loop, but making sure that you're protecting your supply chain. Because at the end of the day, hiring locally in the US will be a much more expensive task than hiring, let's say, in India or in Manila and other places. So the use of AI actually could multiply and 10x the individual, which is onshore. And I think that's the key when we think about, the cost impacts of, this workforce design, is to think about, how do I turn every single person into 10x by giving them sort of that ability and that superpower of the AI, right? Like, that's kind of where organizations need to be thinking, because if they're going to reshore again, it's going to be 3 times the cost of what it was to offshore for that to happen in America. And I think that becomes, they're not going to do it, right?
It can't be like for like, because all of a sudden the outputs of your production line are going to be significantly more expensive. Now, is the market going to bear that? Possibly for a short term, but not in the long term. So it has to be, let's step in and look at how we can do things differently. And again, the manufacturing industry is looking at doing this at the same time as they're responding to green tech and sustainability and environmental challenges. So there's a lot of pressure on how to do this different.
Yeah. And Tesla is a really good example of like the leadership there and the reinvention. Batteries were so expensive to buy, but what they decided was to completely reinvent the actual product. Like, they went back to really first principle thinking and solved it in a completely different way. And I think that's a really good example of cost-effective workforce strategies to pretty much reinvent and be bold. And I'm not advocating for a lot of Elon Musk's behaviors right now, but I think some of the things that are really interesting is the way that he approaches like first principle thinking when it comes to sort of problem solving, building product, and really workforce. Like, I think the way that they've done that has been really interesting, and it should be a really good example to folks when they're thinking about, we don't need to keep hiring the same thing. Like, have we broke it down into tasks? Are we looking at what is the work to be done? What is the problem? And then let's solve it in a different way. A final question here I have here, which is, I'm really actually interested to hear your answer. What role does automation and supply chain resilience play in the evolution of manufacturing job roles? So this one I'm interested in to hear your answer.
Right. So what was the question again? What role does automation
what roles does automation and supply chain resilience play in the evolution of basically jobs within manufacturing?
Yeah, and I think that probably pulls it all together, and probably is a great place to end. So reshoring is a response to supply chain resilience, to make sure that organizations have greater control over all of the inputs they need to deliver the outputs that form the basis of their business. Reshoring, bringing roles and responsibilities back online, can't be like for like, because the cost pressures of bringing from a low cost center to a higher cost center make the outputs prohibitive. So it needs to be done differently. The tools that we have in our disposal are automation and AI and robotics. So some of these have a really high capital cost, which means it's a big bet to get started. But I think that kind of the reshoring